Coalition politics, amongst other issues, are expected to take centre stage at the EFF's Gauteng People's Assembly as it meets this weekend to elect new leadership. Now, the meeting happens amidst disagreements that some processes of the party are being manipulated by party leader Julius Malema, something the party has refuted. Now, let's get analysis. We're now joined via Zoom by political analyst Dr Dale Mckinley. Dr Mckinley, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Now, talk to us about how the party, the EFF, is currently faring in Gauteng and how important then it will be for a competent leader in this province since Mandisa Mashego left, some form of a vacuum in the province, if I can call it that.
Sure. Well, I think, if you look at the last several local government elections, the EFF has been gradually increasing its share of the vote. So it hasn't done badly. Relatively speaking, I think Gauteng is one of its sort of core bases, but it's sort of in some ways stagnated. I think in the last, it's increased, but I don't think it was expecting a lot more. So that's the one area. I think the EFF is now got new competition, and this is the nature of coalition politics. If you look at Action SA and how it did in the last elections, taking a lot of votes in Soweto and other places in Gauteng, look at the Patriotic Alliance, also taking votes and other things. And then you look at the sort of brouhaha that's been happening between Dudula and the EFF. You get the sense that the EFF, and I think this is to explain why the EFF has shifted back towards the ANC in coalition politics, is because the competition is coming from within its sort of base constituency, and it needs to offer something different. So I think that on the broad perspective is the EFF's challenges. But you mentioned the issue of leadership. And I think here the EFF's challenges is predominantly that there's a feeling, and this has arisen again and again, not just in the Gauteng province, but in other provinces, where there's a feeling that the central command is manipulating, as you say, or choosing preferred candidates and foisting them onto the grassroots structures. And in that case, whoever they are, they're always going to be facing problems in terms of legitimacy and in terms of getting that vote out, because if it's not an organic process that comes from the branches, the EFF is going to continue to have this leadership problem, and it really hasn't produced a lot of what I would say dynamic, outstanding leaders in the last few years, other than at the top.
Now, there are talks, of course, that Nkululeko Odunga, coming into this Gauteng chair role, in order to secure its relevance and strength in the province. I know that you're saying they're doing relatively well. What are the critical matters, that this leadership will need to focus on?
Well, obviously, besides basic services, I mean, this is something across the board. Water, electricity, health, education would be a big thing, because the EFF's constituency is still fairly young. They pull from a lot of the youth constituency. So it's also about work opportunities. I mean, what we have right now, especially after COVID, is a youth unemployment rate that is approaching 70% of the under 25s. And so if the EFF wants to tap into where I think its main support base and where it can really grow, it needs to speak to that youth in very practical terms. What are we going to do? Work opportunities, educational opportunities, and other kinds of things that the youth are, free internet, for example, digital issues. These are the kinds of things that the EFF should take up. I think the EFF should spend less time engaging itself in large political battles on big issues, and start really focusing much more on grassroots issues that people themselves, and particularly younger people, really want to hear and know about.
Now, earlier on in my intro, Dr. Mckinley, I mentioned that coalition politics would take center stage, during this weekend's leadership election. Talk to us about just how important then it would be for EFF to, to bring themselves into partnering with like-minded parties in order then to fulfill, their focus areas.
Well, you see, the EFF's challenge is that it flip-flops. It's been flip-flopping for the last several years. And so on one time you hear Julius Malema say, never will we be in a coalition with the ANC. That was a few years ago. Well, obviously that's no longer the case. Now they're moving towards the ANC. So it's about being taken ideologically seriously. You say, we talk about what does the EFF stand for? Well, the EFF needs to stake out that claim. They've obviously presented themselves as a much more progressive left political party that is very sort of anti-systemic and wants to radically change, and particularly in the economic sphere. But then when it comes to practice, they've been in coalition politics with organizations that are very conservative and whose politics and economic politics are fairly status quo. So the EFF needs to figure out, if it's going to be the ANC, well, let's then move with the ANC and be consistent in that, so your voters know exactly where you're moving towards and what your policies are. I think the EFF's big challenge is if they keep on going back and forth with different coalition partners in different metros and municipalities, people are going to lose trust in them, and they're going to question their legitimacy about whether do they stand for anything or not, or is it just simply about accessing power.
And of course, whilst it does that, there's also that very ambitious goal of EFF 2022 million, membership that it wants to grow as a party. How feasible is that?
Well, at this stage, I would say, again, the EFF needs to concentrate on the basics. Instead of having these big campaigns about 1 million members and whatever, maybe they'll get there, but that's not really, shouldn't be their point. Their point should be, and their focus should be, on strengthening their grassroots structures, their branches. If they should have learned anything from the ANC debacle over the last many years, is that when the branches and when the base structures begin to sort of lack democracy and lack legitimacy within your constituencies, you're in trouble politically. So I would suggest that the EFF needs to go back to its own basics. It came onto the scene with a big bang. It moved in and it took a really important space. And I think it's stagnated and lost that, and particularly its constituency is questioning its relevancy. In order to remain relevant, they need to go back and start actually saying, okay, we can use our position in the coalition to deliver on these particular things. When you start to do that, people will start supporting you, and then the bigger things can follow that in terms of membership growth and also political growth.
Yeah, focusing on the basics, I would definitely say, is something that I think all political parties in this country probably need to do. But Dr. McKinley, that's all the time we have for this afternoon. Thank you so much for your time.